Okay, this is the blower. I'm going to take the engine off and put that other 8-horse on. We're going to run it one last time to clean up some pine cones over in that part of the yard. Alright, I am going to check the oil on it before I start it. That has some oil way down in there, but it's pretty low. It pumps, the crankcase, the rings have so much blow by it, pumps oil in through the breather and into the carburetor. And this thing, you can't even hardly see it, fogs you out when it's, you know, running with a full crankcase oil. You can tell when it gets low on oil, it stops smoking as bad. But anyway, we're going to fire it up and give it one last run before we pull the motor to put that other motor on it. I think the crank will fit. It does have a tapered crank with that little collar out. And if I have to move the engine this way one way or another a little bit, I can do that. It's no big deal. So anyway, let's fire this thing up and do some blowing. Alright, it's cold and windy out. It's only maybe 34 degrees out. We had a couple inches of snow this morning, and here we're in mid-April. I'm going to hold the choke down because that's so oily it sucks back open with the vacuum. I think we got a fouled spark plug. Let me change the spark plug. This is what it does to the spark plugs. There's one I've sandblasted. I don't know if they show, hopefully they show up. So I got the camera on my, strapped to my head. But this thing, oil fouls the plugs because of the masses of oil it burns. Well, it doesn't look oil fouled, so hopefully we can get it fired back up here. Alright, I'm going to turn the camera off so I can put these tools back away. Then we'll do some blowing. Alright, let's give it another, we'll give it a pull without a choke first. No, I guess it's going to need a choke. This thing actually runs pretty good. It just burns lots and lots of oil. So we're gonna put that other engine, 8-horse engine, on here. Alright, I got the bolt out and this thing is threaded, so I don't know if this is a taper or not, but I cut this out of a bolt and I'm going to drop that down in there so I don't mess up the threads, and then I'm going to run a bolt into this and see if I can pull this off. If this strips out, I'll just grind the welds off and weld a new nut on there and start over. That's what it looks like without the, you know, the cover. Just so this is the, you can kind of see where the fan is, just give you an idea what's going on here. So I filled that with oil and I found a bolt that somewhat threads in there. The reason I fill it with oil, you know, is lubricate everything so it turns, and this bolt turns in a little bit, but I think the the threads are messed up in that, so I think the impact gun will run that in. We'll see if we can't get that fan off. Well, that's the end of the thread. So I guess we'll be welding the new nut on there. Didn't think the threads were going to hold out. Okay, I'm going to take the plasma cutter here and I'll whack off the welds on this nut. And I got a grade 8 bolt and nut. And I'll weld the nut on there, and I'm going to put the crankshaft bolt back in to hold the nut in the right place. And I'll weld that on really good, and then hopefully we can get that fan off. Hopefully this doesn't turn into a nightmare like it did getting the armature off that engine there. Oh, and that fan I'm fooling with too. I got it working. The motor wasn't working in it, and I got it going, so I'll probably do some work on that too in a video. Okay, I got that cut off, and it does not have a tapered crankshaft, so I'm definitely going to be changing the crank, and this hardened nut isn't big enough, and they didn't have a bigger one. So I'll just weld this one in there. And again, I'll use the bolt for the engine to hold that on there. And that way the fan will bottom at the right place too, and I'll weld that onto the fan really, really good. So I might even put a thick maybe plate in there or something first, because otherwise that fan might fatigue the weld and come off. Alright, one thing I do is I dress my chisels after I use them. I ground that flat and put a new bevel on it, and I always clean those up, so the next time I go to use them, they're not all beat up. So I just keep at them, keep them every time I use them. I just touch them up on the grinder. Saves ruining tools quick. Alright, I took that cut off bolt I had out, and take this and put it back in, tighten it up, and weld that nut on there really, really good. So hopefully this will allow me to get that fan off. Alright, we got a new nut welded on there, so I think I'll put some penetrant in there. I'm going to drop this down in. Then I want to put some penetrating oil in, then we'll do this again. And hopefully the fan comes off. I might try it with a wrench first before I throw the impact gun on it. Maybe maybe it won't strip them, but we're going to put a bunch of penetrant and oil in there. Okay, I got lazy. We're going with the impact gun. Okay, it's coming off, but the fan is hitting the housing, so I'm going to bolt the engine from the base, and then we'll get the fan the rest of the way off. Alright, you can see we obviously have two different crankshafts here. This one's a tapered shaft, and this one's a straight keyed shaft, which is unusual. Usually when there's something spinning like that, they don't have a shaft like this. They usually have a shaft like this, but this size looks the same on both engines, which is the journal size. So I think I'm just going to swap out the crankshafts. You can see somebody's tried to get that fan off in the past, probably to put new rings in the motor. And I mean, this thing runs really nice. It's a sweet running engine, but I'll fill a tank up, and about there I'll have to add oil. About there I'll have to add oil. About there I'll have to add oil. About there I'll have to add oil, and again and again. And when I say add oil, the oil level will here, this one, full is up to here, and every time I add oil, the oil's down to about there. So it'll burn that much oil out down in the crankcase, which is basically from there to there, to that much gas. So, and it follows the plug all the time too. So it's just pretty much all worn out. So this one appears to be a good motor. Didn't smoke any. The guy said it didn't use oil when the generator that it was on worked. Alright, I'm going to drain the oil out of the crankcase. This thing has not had an oil change since I got it going. It just used so much oil I never even bothered. In fact, a lot of times when I added oil, I just added drain oil from the car because I didn't have any clean oil and I didn't see any. It's kind of a waste of money to put clean oil in an engine that burns so much oil. So I just, like I say, I just added drain oil to it all the time. Alright, while the nasty oil is draining out, I thought I'd show you this. This is a little tool that I use all the time. This is like a little ratchet, and you can turn it, change the direction, and they're really neat for like when you got loose bolts and you just want to turn them out and you can't get enough grip on this. You get one of these out. I have this in 1/4 inch and 3/8 drive. That's all you really need. If I use half, I'll just put a adapter on it. So, okay, the next step to get the crank out of this motor is to pull the flywheel. So I'm going to get the blower housing off, get the debris screen, starter ratchet, all that stuff off from the flywheel, and then I can pull a crankcase side cover and disconnect the rod. Probably have to take out the camshaft, and then we'll get the crank out. It's pretty simple. These engines are really ultra simple. I got to save the gas tank and the bracket off this motor too for the other motor. The gas tank is actually this bracket that it bolts to, that's bolted to the engine is broken, so I have to weld it. But this engine's a 1975. You'll just have to turn your thing sideways. It says it's model 190432, type 0535-01, code 750421111. And that serial number is E972015. I think that is the serial number to the blower. Okay, so you put this on here, and I just got that, and then it actually wasn't even that tight. So there's the starter ratchets off, this washer, and that washer is kind of convexed. It's not a flat washer. The bulge outside, I don't know if you can see, but bulge outside goes out. So anyway, I'm going to go have some lunch. And then we'll pop the flywheel off. Okay, get back to work here. I just finished lunch and looked up some parts on my microfiche. I got the PTO side seal, or not the PTO, I'm sorry, the flywheel side. I'll have to go to the mower shop and get the PTO side, and I got the crankcase cover gasket. So all I need to do is buy one oil seal. So, alright, I got the puller on there, and I just snugged it up a little bit. We'll see if this... Sometimes you just do that and it pops them. There it goes. What I did here was I took a file and some sandpaper and cleaned this up. There were some marks on that, and that's generally the same size as the journal, so this cover will have to slide over that, and I don't want to mess the cover up, and I don't want to have it stick and bind and make it difficult to get the cover off. So usually I do these while the engine's running, and I just run a file or sandpaper on there, but this I had to unbolt the engine to get the fan off. It was just more work to bolt it back on and try and start it, so I just said the heck with it. So let's get the cover unbolted and get this thing apart. They're all 1/2 inch head, the bolt, that is. Okay, all the bolts are out and starting to get the cover off here. Got it tilted up so the oil doesn't dump out. It's got little pins that it sets in, so you gotta get it out of those. And sometimes if a valve is open, the cam makes a little tough jiggle off. So sometimes it's good to put them up on the compression stroke, but we'll get it off. Well, we got a ball bearing crank here, so I don't know if this engine over here has a ball bearing crank or not, but if it does, we're kind of SOL on using that, swapping the cranks. I don't know if I want to put any money into putting that new rings in this motor. So anyway, oh wow, I can see the pistons really badly scored and worn. I can see the skirt of the piston. So probably needs a piston, rings, a cylinder bore, stuff I'm not going to do to it. So let me pop, I got to drain the oil out of that and pop the cover on that and see if that's a ball bearing crank. So as long as we're at this stage, I'm going to show you how the governor works. This is driven by the camshaft and this is the governor. The faster the engine runs, the further those weights come out and it pushes that center out. So when it's spinning, you know, the faster it spins, the more it pushes that out. So that pushes on this. That moves the throttle and that arm. So when this is, when you set these governors up, you want this against this in that position at idle. So you have that up against that piece in the governor, and you can loosen this up. And then you can turn that with a screwdriver, this little slit in there, until that is tight against the gear. This one you turn clockwise. Some you turn counterclockwise, some you turn clockwise. This one you turn it so that pushes tight against the grill. With your throttle in the wide open position, tighten that up. So then your throttle is wide open, and this and this and this are all touching at idle. So when it's spinning, it pushes on this and brings your idle back down, or your throttle back down so it doesn't overspeed. But that's even got a little wear on it. So yeah, this thing looks pretty tired. So anyway, let's pull a cover on this other motor and have a look at it and see what kind of crank's in it. Now it looks like the flywheel side is just regular bushing. Doesn't look like that's a ball bearing in there, so it's not big enough to be a ball bearing. So I'm going to assume that's a bushing. So hopefully that engine's the same. If it's not, we'll just switch the side cover. I think I can, you know, still use this crank in that motor, because if this is a bushing, I'll put this cover on the engine. Alright, we'll get the oil out of this engine. It's actually clean oil coming out. Fairly clean. It's definitely not filthy. Okay, we're in luck. This has a ball bearing crank, so, and it's bushinged at that end. So the crankshaft is interchangeable. So we'll start. I'm just going to put the side cover back on this engine because I still have to pull the blower housing and the flywheel and whatnot. So I'm just going to slap the cover back on and we'll get the crank out of this motor. And then we'll go from there. I don't know if you can see this or not, but that cylinder still has all its machining. There's really no scores. That thing, the cylinder in this thing's in really nice shape. This engine, I suspect, has some really low hours on it. Still see all the crosshatching on the bore. So this will be a good engine for that blower. Okay, I just took a picture of this. I just was marking where the timing is because the mark on that gear is under this bearing, and I'm not taking that bearing off. So that dot is the timing mark on the camshaft, and there's usually a notch on the tooth that it matches up with. So that dot just below it is where the cam gear goes into where I etched, and nothing rides there. I double check to make sure nothing rides there. If you have a bearing there, you don't want to mark up your crank, but I just wanted to make sure that still shows, and it does, and it's just barely marked, but it's enough to where I can tell where the timing mark will be when I put it back together. Okay, the next step is I got to straighten those two tabs out and undo the rod cap, and then we can get the crank out. So to get those, I just take a screwdriver and just tap it with a hammer to straighten them up. And I already loosened the connecting rod cap bolts, so they're just going to come out with my fingers now. And I screwed the starter ratchet back on so I don't mess up the end of the crank while I was working on it, so I'll unscrew that. That's just on finger tight. But yeah, there's the oil slinger rod bolt. Well, I guess I had the camera on the wrong setting and just took a still picture. So anyway, we got the crank out of the motor. It looks good. The rod cap. It's actually in pretty good shape, the rod cap. So the valve tappets. That's the exhaust tappet. They're generally the same. Usually adjust the valve lash by the valve end, not the tappet end. And the camshaft. So really, all in all, this motor's, the only problem with it is it uses excessive oil from the wear in the cylinder. So maybe it just didn't have a clean air filter or an air filter in it for a while or something. Wore the cylinder and rings out, because the internal in the crankcase is pretty decent. And the engine didn't knock or rattle or anything. It did run good. So, alright, I'll get the other motor apart. Okay, I guess I'll start taking the recoil housing and the flywheel off this engine. Alright, the flywheel ended up being a little bit of work like the alternator, but it's off. And I had to use my puller, and I just have a little box here with the bolt for it and all the bolts and fasteners I use for various different stuff when I need to pull things, so just keep it all together. So this is the rod cap out of this motor. Looks about the same as the other one, a little bit better. It's a little shinier. So let's get the crank out and see if the other crank will fit. The crankshaft is out. The tappets are still in there, so I don't mix them up. The camshaft looks really good. The crankshaft, the only difference I see, other than, the end that I need the PTO on, is this one has the little thing cut in it for the breaker points. The other engine had points and condenser, and this one has a magnetron. So this one doesn't have the little divot for the breaker points. So that engine will no longer run because I don't have a crank that'll work the points. So that's just going to be parts. Maybe we'll pull ahead and pull a piston and have a look at it in the future. But this is tappets, the governor, connecting rod, cylinder. So yeah, it's all pretty nice. So we'll get this the old crank out of the, turn that light off, that kind of bleaches it out. Makes it nice to work, but not good to video. So anyway, we'll get this crank and this block, and like I say, this crank here would be pretty useless in the other engine, so I'll just set it aside. Alright, one thing I am doing is I'm putting a new oil seal in it. This is the old oil seal. What I like to do is I like to put a little dab of red Loctite around that, and then just tap it in with a flat, thing round enough to where it doesn't go in crooked. So if I don't know if you noticed that or not, but there's a little red Loctite on there. And I'll put the seal up to here. And then I'll just take my bearing driver and just lightly tap it in. Engine just moves around now that it's really light. Seal's in there nicely, and I'll put some oil on the seal before I put the crank in. So the other seal I don't have, but I can change the seal if it leaks without taking the cover off. I'll show you how to do that sometime in the future. Alright, I took another still picture, but to put the cam and the crank in without removing the piston and rod, you can't have I put the piston at TDC, but I put the crank journal in down there, and the timing marks don't line up when you have the journal down there. And you want your lobes so that they're not pushing on the tappets, otherwise you can't get the camshaft back in. So with the engine, laying like it was, like this, what I did on here, I'm going to get it steady there. So I took the crankshaft, and this is, like I say, I don't want to take it back out, but I just lined the marks up out of the engine, and then I turned the two until I had them where I could get them into the engine to where the crank cleared the connecting rod and the lobes cleared the tappets, and then I turned the crank and the cam together to get the rod on the journal, and then I just put the cap on loosely, and then I tightened the rod just enough, it's just, a little more than finger tight, and then I checked my timing mark, which is on the camshaft, and I don't know if it shows up in the video, and then the mark I made on the crank are all lined up, so the cam timing should be spot on. And we'll get the crankshaft torqued down, and maybe take some brake cleaner or something, just give it a quick clean out in there so there's no grit or dirt or anything in there. The rod torque specifications 185 inch-pounds, so I set my clicking torque wrench at 185 foot-pounds. It has 175, and then you go to 10, and that's 185 inch-pounds, and you just go until it clicks. And I already did it. You can see it clicks. Clicks. So the next step is to bend those metal lock tabs back over. I'm going to take a razor blade and clean this parting surface all off here and here, and then put the new gasket on and throw it together. And you don't use sealer on this, because the gasket is what sets the crankshaft end play. You don't want them too tight by putting sealer on it. You want the gasket. So let me get that cleaned up, and we'll get the cover on. So the surfaces are all clean. Put the new gasket on. Gasket only goes on one way. Never use sealer on your crankcase gasket. That stuff is part of the gasket there. So I torqued the side cover to 140 inch-pounds, and never use an extension with your torque wrench because that'll absorb some of the torque. So it's basically together. So next is get the gas tank and bracket off this engine. So the bracket needs welding, so I'm going to pull the tank and then fix the bracket and throw it on that engine. I'm going to get these tanks off, take the fuel hose off, take those two bolts out, and these straps just slide off and the tank comes off. And then the bracket's held on with two bolts here for the head and two bolts right down here. And like I say, it needs a little weld, so because the tank was loose flopping around on it when I was using it last fall. So you undo these straps and the tank's off, and you can see the bracket, the mounting bracket for the tank. This is the ear that's broken off. This will have to be welded on right there. And I noticed that this one's cracked down here and right across there, so I'll re-weld that one at the same time. And I think I will call it a day and do that tomorrow. So, well, I was just sitting here taking a gander at it. This bracket goes on there, and I noticed this head's a little taller than this head. So then I took the bolts from the other engine to this engine. But when I hold that up there about where it'll sit, those bolts are about 1/4 inch from lining up. So I think I'll just cut, and then just weld some more down in here so it fits those holes. And you can see the crack in that pretty well. So that one's about ready to give out. I don't know if it shows up in the video or not. It's cracked right across there, and this one's cracked across here too. So this is gonna get all welded up nice and redone a little bit, so hopefully it fits on there. I think I'll pop those head bolts out, and if it doesn't seem like it'll fit up, I'll just swap the heads. No big deal. Well, I think it'll be all right. I think when I weld this up, I'll just make those so it has an elongated hole, so it bolts there and there, and it fits on the head. And so I gave this a glass bead blasting to see if there's any other cracks in it. The only cracks I really see were these ones here. So none of the rest of the brackets cracked. So get that welded up tomorrow. Well, this is day 2, and just got the tank bracket all welded up. I'm going to give it a quick sandblast and coat of black paint, and then we'll throw the tank on. Okay, it's completely together. Got the fuel line on. I just used the fuel line off the other engine, seeing it was only a couple of years ago I put the new fuel hose on. So anyway, we'll see if it runs or blows up, and if it runs good, we'll throw a coat of paint on it and clean the blower base up and put it on. So I'm gonna, when I start it up, I'm gonna take some 80 grit while it's running and clean the crankshaft off so the fan goes on easier, and I'm gonna bead blast the inside of the hub of the fan, and then I'll put anti-seize on it when I put it together. So if I ever need to take the fan off again, it'll be easier, you know, if I need to change that oil seal. I did not change that. I did not have that oil seal. Well, I somewhat Mickey Mouse clamped it to the bench, and I'm going to open up the garage and see what happens. Okay, I'll turn on the gas valve. I've not done anything to the carburetor other than that initial cleaning when I got this generator that this engine was on. So hopefully it works. We'll allow the float bowl to fill up there for a minute. I don't have anything to work that throttle, so hopefully it doesn't go to off. Maybe I'll see if I can stick something in there. Alright, let's see what happens. Clean the carburetor. So I put the carburetor from the old engine on there, and we'll see what it does now. Hopefully it runs a little better. spray the manifold with gum out and it smooths out by the carburetor. So I'm going to change the manifold too. I suspect it has maybe a cracked manifold. So when I was spraying the carb cleaner up and around in this area is when it smoothed out. So yeah, we may, you know, if it got bumped or something, yeah, it could have got cracked. So we'll take a look at it. Well, the manifold was the problem. It wasn't even idle before. It was like a clock. Okay, we got a good running 8-horse Briggs Stratton for the blower. Doesn't smoke any at all out the exhaust, so we'll paint it up and get that base painted up. And alright, I threw an ultra quick paint job on it, so that looks okay. This is some paint I had. I've got probably less than, I don't know, a quart of oil, and I didn't even put a spark plug in it. I didn't buy the gaskets I had, so really I don't have anything into it right now. Maybe if I counted those gaskets and that and the oil and stuff, I'd have probably $10 into it. Just a bunch of time. Alright, I found a couple of decent used tires that I can put on this thing to replace those really messed up ones, but let's fire it up. Doesn't smoke like the old engine, that's for sure. Runs good. It's nice to be able to idle it down when you're just trying to put leaves in a pile. Very happy. Well, there's what's left of the old engine. We'll just save parts. I ended up not using the carburetor. The manifold was what I used. So there's something, crack or something in this manifold. Anyway, we got a gold mine and parts laying here. I'll go through and keep what I want, throw the rest away. Well, I guess maybe tomorrow or the next day I'll put the tires on, but that's the end of this video. So I appreciate you watching my videos. Thank you very much, and if you enjoy my channel, please subscribe. Thank you.